Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, and it really is the key to promotion and the key to success in the kingdom of God. And it is something that I have seen, it's a pattern that I've seen work in my life over and over and over and over. And it really is one of the pathways to people to find out their purpose, their destiny. You know, the whole name of the show is Living with Purpose. If you want to find out what your purpose is, if you will do this one thing that I'm going to be talking about over the next couple of weeks, if you'll do this one thing, if you'll do it with your whole heart, if you'll do it with a right heart, then I guarantee you that you will begin to come into a greater grasp of what God has called you to do, who you are, why you're here, the whole 9 yards. Well, Pastor Jack, what is that thing? What is that one thing that if I do this thing, then I'll have all these things? It's very, very simple. It's called serving. And it is one of the greatest things. You know, a lot of people know my testimony that, you know, I wasn't born saved, and we'll just put it that way. And I lived a life that was opposite of the kingdom of God. I would say I lived a life that was in opposition to the kingdom of God. But when I got gloriously and wonderfully saved, and it's almost 32 years ago, one of the first things that happened to me, or one of the biggest parts of my discipleship, or a part of my discipleship, was I started serving in my local church. Now, a lot of people would say, well, Pastor Jack, you're a pastor. That's your job. That's what you were called to do. You know, that's your job. You're supposed to be doing that, and that's just what you were called to do. I was never, ever called to be a pastor first and then a servant second. God, when I first got born again and I got plugged into my local church, and yes, I went through a discipleship program, and I was faithful to come. You know, I came to church, and I came every time the doors were open to hear the word, and I received the word, and I worshiped, and I did all those things. But what I found was that I was just coming to church, and I was just being served. And that's wonderful for a season. You know, when we first get saved, we come to church and we're served. We come, we sit, we listen, we enjoy the service. We have the word preached to us. We take advantage of all the other opportunities in the church. If I have kids, I put my kids in the children's department. There was somebody in the parking lot that greeted me. There was a greeter at the door. There was an usher and all these things. But yet in all of those ministries, I was being served. And so one of the first things that I did when I got saved is I wanted to serve. And many of you know my testimony. They needed help in the sound booth. And I knew nothing about sound. And this is back when soundboards were not digital, they were analog. And so you just had this massive soundboard, and you had all of these auxes and ins and inputs and outputs, and you had all the different sliders for each different channel and all that. And I knew nothing from nothing. But I did understand that there was one button that was called master volume. And that master volume either went up or that master volume went down. And that's what I knew. And so I knew that every Sunday morning when praise and worship was going on or when pastor was speaking, I was right there. I was serving. I had that button. It was going to go up or it was going to go down. And I waited, and I was attentive to make sure that if they told me to take it up, I could take it up, or to take it down, I would take it down. I was faithful to that button. Well, that also included that I needed to be there early to be a part of the worship team. So that was good. I also needed to be there on Tuesday nights because that was our midweek service, and I worked in the sound booth, and I needed to be there on Tuesday nights. Well, there was sometimes they had practices, so I needed to be there for practice. What was happening is that there really was not a whole lot being done by me just knowing what to do with one channel on one soundboard. It was me learning to be faithful and to show up on time and to be a part of a team and to serve and to give of my time, which is really, you know, a lot of people say in the earth that money's the most valuable thing. It's not. Your time is the most valuable thing. Whatever you give the most of your time to, that's your God. Whatever you're giving the majority of your time to, that's who you serve. I know money follows after that, but really time is one of our greatest. That's kind of how we know what we believe, what we value the most, and that's what we give our time to. And so now all of a sudden, a Saturday night would come along, and for me, coming out of a lifestyle where we like to go out on Fridays and Saturday nights, I knew that, you know what, I probably need to stay home and I need to go to bed and get a good night's sleep because I needed to serve at 8 o'clock the next morning. Somebody was depending on me at 8 o'clock the next morning. Now you're saying, Jack, hey, all you did was one button. A monkey could do that. You're absolutely right. A monkey could do that. But what it was doing for me was that I was learning to sow. I was not getting paid for what I'm doing. See, there's a shift that's taken place in the church today. And when the majority of the church, it was made, there's something called the helps ministry. And the helps of the church was there, and it was all, and I hate to use the word volunteer because that's really not an accurate word. A volunteer is someone that just kind of goes and maybe works in a soup kitchen or does something and then leaves. I'm talking about helps ministry. I'm talking about when I come and I present my time as I would an offering to the Lord, there's something more that takes place than just volunteering. When I come and I serve and I give of my time and I sacrifice and I come early, the whole church used to be run like that. There were very, very few paid positions in the church because the church was made up of people that gave of their time, their talent, and their treasury for the house of God. But what's happened over the years is because people were not taking their place, were not recognizing or understanding that they do have a part more than just coming to church, that it's our responsibility to serve in the church, that now we have to pay more and more people. Well, there's more budget now that has to be allocated. Now I have to pay for. And don't get me wrong, a workman is worthy of their wages. If I'm bringing in technical people and they've gone to school for years and years to study how to do a certain thing, I think that they should be enumerated for what they do. But still, even in that, there should be a part of us that is serving. And when I'm serving and I'm serving and I'm serving, then I am producing a spiritual, almost a substance of faith that is going to help bring me to my place of promotion. I'll say it like this. Your faithfulness in the earth is your resume in the spirit. When God, and I learned this a long time ago, when God is looking over all of his great servants, he's looking to make a great leader. God doesn't look over all of his great leaders to make a great servant. God looks over all of his great servants to make great leaders. And I'm just going to go through a list, and I'm going to show you how many people were doing something when God called them. Now, you might once again say, well, Pastor Jack, those people were all called to the ministry. They were all called to do things. I totally understand that. But each and every one of us, when you got born again, according to 1 Peter, we got called out. Each and every one of us as a believer has been called out. Each one of us has a call of God on our life. And a big part of our being called out is serving. And it's in our serving that we find out a lot of times what God has called us to do or who we are. A lot of times, and I'm going to show you, had people not been serving, they would have missed the greatest opportunities that they've ever had in their life. So let me just give you a couple of these real quick. Now, I want you to notice that when Samuel went looking for a king for Israel, Samuel went to the house of David's house, and all of David's brothers were brought before him, and Samuel was like, none of these guys are supposed to be the king. And Samuel asked David's father, said, is there another one? And he goes, yeah, I got one more. He's out just tending my father. He's tending the sheep. He's out in the fields. And Samuel said, bring me that one. I want you to notice that God didn't pick the ones that were in the house, that looked the best, that were the biggest, the strongest, had the most experience. No. God looked for the one that was serving. David was out serving, watching his father's few sheep. That's when Samuel found him. I want you to notice, this is one of my favorite stories, is the story of Ruth. And Ruth, she was a foreigner from a foreign land. She had married one of Naomi's sons. Both of Naomi's sons and husbands died. Oprah and Naomi could have come back to Israel. One of them decided to stay there. You never hear from her again. But Ruth follows Naomi and goes back to the promised land. Now, What Ruth did was she served Naomi. When they got back to Israel, she would go into the fields. She would work very, very hard. She would serve. She would get grain for them. She would bring it back. And the little bit that I read in the scriptures about Naomi is that Naomi was not the most pleasant person in the world at that time. She had suffered horrible loss. She had lost her husband, lost her sons. She'd kind of lost her way, and they really thought that that bloodline was over. But you know what? Where was Boaz? See, Boaz was not in Moab. Boaz was not on the journey from Moab to Israel. Where was Boaz? Boaz was right in the middle of Ruth serving. Had Ruth not served, she might not have ever met Boaz. So I want you to see that right now, if we will take of our time, if we will learn, and I'm going to just be real transparent with you, you need to be serving in your local church. If you're a part of a local church, God never called us to just come and sit and be served Sunday after Sunday. But you say, Pastor Jack, I get up and I go to church every Sunday morning. I go to midweek service. I want you to understand the thinking pattern there. What you're saying is that you go and you sit and you're served. If we want to see some real growth in our life, if we want to be put into a place where we run into the prophecies of God, if we want to run into the blessings of God, if we want to run into all the faithfulness of God, then what I want to do is I want to start serving. Because I will say this, the prophet shows up where you're supposed to be, not where you want to be. If you want a word from the Lord, then you need to be where you're supposed to be and not where you want to be. A big part of our Christian growth is resistance. It's dying to ourself. And I used to really struggle with trying to get people to help because, it's good enough that they come and, they give. And, we cannot, listen to me, this is very, very important. Your giving can never substitute for your serving. A lot of times when we have we'll ask for help at the church and, we're going to do an outreach or, we're going to go on a missions trip or whatever. And we're going to do some fundraisers and we're going to get people involved. A lot of times people will say, you know what, I don't want to serve, but here, I'll just give money towards it. Well, I appreciate that. But you know what? You're missing out. There is a joy. There is a blessing when it comes to serving. I have two relatives, and I'm not going to name who they are. They both have left the earth. I had one relative that pretty much lived their whole life unto themselves. They never ventured out, they lived alone. They were not the happiest people in the world. They dealt with depression. They were heavily medicated because of all the depression and all the things, because they kind of lived a life just unto themselves. I had another relative, and they lived their whole life just serving. They had people at their house all the time, and I'm talking into their 80s. They were serving in their church. They had people coming to their house. And I got to tell you, she was the most full of life person I ever met. She never, ever, ever stood still. She was constantly moving, constantly full of joy, constantly serving, constantly coming to the house of God, not asking for anything, but yet sowing and sowing. And I got to be honest, she lived one of the most fulfilling, happiest lives, a life that you would almost say, if I wanted to copy someone's life, I want to copy that. If you want to find some joy, if you want to find peace, if you want to find fulfillment, then I encourage you. You want to start serving in your local church because your church desperately needs it. I want you to notice also that when Jesus went looking for disciples, he didn't go to the Bible school. He went to where someone was already working. He went to where they were fishermen. He called them out. These 4 disciples were fishermen. They were helping their fathers, and God called them out from there. Matthew was a tax collector. He called them out. Anybody that God ever used, they were serving when he found them. They didn't go and just find the smartest, the most intelligent, the biggest, the smartest. No. He looked for somebody that had a kingdom understanding of serving. Even Paul, when Paul got called out, he was a Pharisee. And yes, he was going after Christians, but at least Paul was moving when God found him. You know, Moses, he was in Egypt for 40 years. He came out of Egypt. He had to be taught how to serve for 40 years so he could go back and have a 40-year ministry of taking people out of Egypt. He was serving our whole life. If you want promotion, we've got to find a place where we can be faithful, and it should be your local church. God bless you. We'll see you next week.